Welcome to the FrightenHouse Movie Morgue Recap Series.
In this episode of Movie Morgue Recaps, we look at John Carpenter's 1978 release of Halloween. With the bone-chilling tagline, "The Night He Came Home," debuted one of the most terrifying movie maniacs of all time, Michael Myers. Halloween night 1963 in the small town of Haddonfield, Illinois. The opening scene establishes an eerie point of view that focuses directly on the Myers house. Through the darkness of this Halloween night, we watch through the POV of the yet-to-be-seen Michael Myers as he slowly moves in closer to his family home. The unseen Michael voyeuristically peers through a window of the Myers house as he watches his older sister Judith making out with her boyfriend. The young couple are blissfully unaware they are being watched. As Michael enters the rear entrance of the Myers house, and upon entering the kitchen, an arm emerges from behind the view of his unseen figure to extract a butcher knife from a kitchen drawer. From the shadows, his POV quietly watches as his sister's partially dressed young boyfriend exits from the second-story staircase, leaving for the night. Michael continues his menacing path up to the second floor of the Myers home. Michael comes across the mask previously worn by Judith's boyfriend, picks it up, and instinctively places the mask on his own face. We now see Michael's POV and whirl through the eye holes of this Halloween mask. Michael first focuses on clothes strewn across the floor, followed by the sight of his unclothed sister sitting at her night table stroking her hair. As Michael silently advances toward the girl, she senses a presence before spinning around in horror while covering her partially nude torso. In shock, she recognizes the identity of her stalker to be none other than her younger brother, just as he proceeds to brutally and repeatedly stabs her to death. Once Michael has completed his act of senseless brutality, lacking emotion, Michael calmly walks away and exits his family home. Upon exiting the home, Michael is encountered by his parents who have just returned home by car. The parents approach Michael, and with shock in his voice, Michael's father calls out to his son while ripping the mask from his face. As the killer is unmasked, we discover that Michael is not only a child, but also a knife-wielding child butcher. Smiths Grove, Illinois. 15 years later, it is now October 30th, 1978. We meet Dr. Sam Loomis, Michael's psychiatrist, and his accompanying nurse, Marion Chambers, who arrive at Warren County Sanitarium to pick up Michael for his court hearing. Dr. Loomis is convinced that Michael is pure evil and poses a significant danger to society. Dr. Loomis explains Michael's history to Marion, revealing that he believes Michael's only motivation is to kill again. As if nothing else could go wrong on the eve of Halloween, and on the very same grounds that Michael Myers is being locked away, a security breach has allowed the patients of Warren County Sanitarium to wander free, including Michael Myers. As Dr. Loomis desperately rushes to the front gate, and before he can contact the institution's administrative staff, Michael Myers makes his first shocking appearance as he leaps on top of the vehicle being driven by Loomis's nurse assistant. With the vehicle moving, Michael reaches through the driver's window and ferociously grabs for the nurse, causing her to lose control. The nurse flees in terror from the vehicle, giving Michael Myers the opportunity to finally escape. In complete frustration and concern, Loomis cries out, "The evil is escaping." The following day, October 31st, hours before Halloween night, Laurie Strode, a 17-year-old resident of Haddonfield, on her way to school is instructed by her father, a local real estate agent selling the infamous Meyer murder home, to drop the property key off at the house for a prospective buyer. While walking, Laurie runs into Tommy, one of the children she is scheduled to babysit during the Halloween night festivities. The two playfully talk about watching monster movies and making popcorn. Once Laurie and Tommy arrive outside the Myers house, and despite Laurie's fearless behavior, Tommy expresses apprehension and fear about approaching the house. Tommy's caution and trepidation are proven valid when an unseen figure moves in the shadows within the Myers' house as it watches Laurie drop off the key. And thus, the stalking of Laurie Strode begins with Michael Myers. As Laurie walks away from the Myers' house, oblivious to the lurking danger, Michael Myers enters the frame, watching from afar. Dr. Loomis, furious with Dr. Wynn's reckless security of the Warren County Sanitarium, resulting in the escape of Michael Myers, delivers his dire warning regarding who and what Michael Myers is, and the danger he presents to not only anyone should they encounter him, but the extreme threat he poses for his childhood neighborhood of Haddonfield. Throughout the course of the day leading into Halloween night, Michael Myers makes his unnerving presence known on several occasions. One of those begins with Michael making his frightening mask-wearing appearance outside Laurie's classroom, followed by a chilling visit to the grounds near Tommy's primary school. Heading toward Haddonfield, Dr. Loomis stops near the site of a wrecked pickup truck. There he makes the unsettling discovery when he spots Michael Myers' discarded institutional garments, cigarette pack, and red book of matches from the vehicle Myers escaped in. He now knows Michael Myers is already back in Haddonfield. Back in Haddonfield, Laurie walks from school with her friends, Annie and Linda. They discuss their plans for Halloween night, and Laurie reveals that she will be babysitting the Doyle family. Michael, having killed a mechanic for his clothes and stolen a Halloween mask, drives through Haddonfield until he spots his intended victim, Laurie. Even more disturbing, the masked figure behind the wheel of the car is the same one who obsessively watched her earlier. The masked driver slows down and stares directly at the girls before aggressively speeding away. Slightly irritated by the odd behavior of what the girls believe to be a creep, Annie mockingly shouts out at the masked driver. However, this elicits an extreme reaction from the driver when he slams his vehicle to a screeching halt. Throughout this day, Laurie continues to have bone-chilling sightings of Michael Myers and near brushes with the stalker she only knows to be as strangely dressed and very creepy. With each passing hour toward Halloween night, Laurie is continuously plagued by more and more strange occurrences that frighten, agitate, and keep her unrattled. During a visit to the local graveyard where Judith Myers was buried 15 years before, Dr. Loomis is visibly disturbed and concerned that Judith Myers' gravestone has been removed from her burial plot. With resignation, Loomis declares that Michael Myers has indeed come back home. Annie picks up Laurie for the evening before heading over to the Wallace residence for her own babysitting job, while also dropping Laurie off at the nearby home of the Doyle family to also babysit Tommy Doyle for Halloween night. Laurie, still shaken by her repeated sightings of the masked stalker, reveals the incidents with Annie. Typically, Annie keeps the conversation lighthearted and helps Laurie to relax. However, unbeknownst to the two girls, Dr. Loomis's stolen station wagon with Michael Myers behind the wheel begins to follow them. During the girls' drive through Haddonfield, Annie runs into her father, the local sheriff, Lee Brackett, who's at the site of a break-in and burglary of the local hardware shop. While the items stolen were odd, being Halloween masks, rope, and knives, the sheriff writes off the break-in as the possible work of kids. At the site of the hardware store break-in, Dr. Loomis attempts to warn Haddonfield's sheriff of the impending horror about to descend on their town. While anxiously waiting for the sheriff to hear his urgent concerns, Dr. Loomis doesn't realize that the horror itself, Michael Myers, has driven right past him en route to his mission. As Annie and Laurie proceed to their babysitting jobs for the night, not far behind their vehicle, the ever-relentless Michael Myers continues his obsessive and disturbing pursuit of Laurie. As night falls in Haddonfield, Annie enters the residential street address of the Doyle home and drops off Laurie. Not far behind, we watch through the POV of Michael Myers as he surveils the actions of each of the girls. He slowly watches Annie park in the driveway of the Wallace house, before finally parking Dr. Loomis's stolen station wagon and exiting the driver's side. From the shadow of night, Michael Myers watches Annie as she walks to the door of the home and greets Mr. and Mrs. Wallace and their daughter, Lindsay. Dr. Loomis and Sheriff Lee Brackett arrive at the old Myers' house and the site of Michael's brutal and cold murder of his sister Judith 15 years earlier. As the two investigate the home, they discover the still warm carcass of an animal, leading Loomis to assume Michael Myers likely killed the animal without hunger. While on the second floor, and standing in the exact spot where Michael committed the act of butchery, Dr. Loomis describes Michael as having the devil's eyes and something best described as pure evil. As Lori settles in for the night while looking after Tommy Doyle, she playfully attempts to entertain both herself and Tommy with some of his not-so-mom-approved interests like comic books and the local taboo topic regarding the boogeyman. Lori manages to safely avoid the topic when the phone rings, interrupting both Tommy and Lori's own fear. As Annie chats with Lori, the Wallace family's German Shepherd enters the kitchen and becomes violently disturbed by the presence of Michael Myers outside the house. While both Annie and Lindsay are distracted, the threat of Michael Myers looms just outside their window. However, the family German Shepherd leaves to investigate the presence. While Lori is distracted chatting with Annie over the phone, Tommy's fears of the boogeyman existence are realized when he looks through the living room blinds and sees the masked and soulless figure of Michael Myers watching from across the street. In an attempt to convince Lori that he's just witnessed the real-life boogeyman across the street from his home, Tommy runs over to his babysitter for help. In response, Lori takes an unconcerned look through the blinds, but casually shrugs off Tommy's concerns and returns back to her phone call. While Lori and Annie are dismissive of the lurking danger, the boogeyman, also known as Michael Myers, is quite real and has returned to his hometown of Haddonfield. Michael Myers has now set his sights on Annie. Through the covering of his mask, we can hear Michael's heavy breathing as he intently and disturbingly watches Annie through the rear kitchen door window. The Wallace family's German Shepherd tracks down Michael Myers, but in the face of pure evil, the dog stands little chance against this stalking malevolence. Distracted by the noise of Lindsay's blaring television, Annie is completely unaware of the fate of the family dog and just how defenseless the Wallace house is against what is to come. Enjoying Halloween night, Lori and Tommy watch horror movies and engage in small talk until Tommy brings the discussion back to the topic of seeing the boogeyman earlier. Lori attempts to diffuse Tommy's mounting fear by explaining it all away as a baseless Halloween legend. After receiving a call from her boyfriend Paul, the couple makes plans to get together for the night back at the Wallace house. Annie agrees to drive over and pick him up, but first needs to talk with Lindsay, the girl she's babysitting. Annie convinces Lindsay to stay over the Doyle house with Lori and Tommy and watch television with them while she leaves to get Paul. Lindsay, now seemingly safe and happy over at the Doyle house with Tommy to enjoy Halloween fun, Annie relaxes a moment to thank Lori and prepare for the rest of the night with her boyfriend Paul. Annie rushes back across the street heading for the garage where her car is parked. After an attempt to open her car door, she realizes that the door is locked and she has forgotten the vehicle's keys inside the Wallace house. Annie makes a quick dart from the garage back to the front of the house. Upon entering the house, she quickly locates her car keys before once again rushing back out to the garage. However, this time around, instinctively Annie reaches for the car's door handle, and oddly, it opens without the need for her key. For a split second, Annie pauses as she realizes that her car door was now somehow and suspiciously unlocked. In the presence of a fogged windshield, Michael Myers strikes from the back seat, grabbing her around the neck. Annie desperately struggles from the vice-like grip and supernatural strength of Michael Myers. But just as the last bit of life leaves her body, Michael slices his knife across Annie's throat to absolutely end the struggle. Unaware of the true horror that has just taken place on their street, Tommy and Lindsay are absorbed in watching spooky television programming throughout Halloween night. Tommy, however, decides to play a prank on Lindsay by hiding behind the living room curtains and quietly calling out her name to frighten her. But just as Lindsay gets up to follow the boy's voice, almost out of instinctive fear, Tommy slowly turns and glances out of the window, only to be met with the most horrifying sight imaginable. Tommy sees Michael Myers carrying the limp and lifeless body of Annie across the front yard, up the front porch, and into the Wallace house. Transfixed on the scene of horror, Tommy bumps into Lindsay, causing her to scream, and in turn, frightening him even more. As Lori runs over responding to the kids screaming, Tommy excitedly tries to convince both Lori and Lindsay that he has seen the boogeyman again. Lori angrily tells Tommy to stop scaring Lindsay with his stories, and there is no boogeyman outside. If Tommy doesn't stop, Lori threatens to turn off the television and send him to bed. However, Lindsay confides in Tommy that she believes that he saw the boogeyman. In anticipation of Michael Myers' reemergence in Haddonfield and back at the scene of his sister's murder, Dr. Loomis waits outside of the Myers' house. It isn't long before he is joined by Sheriff Brackett. Brackett still doesn't quite believe in Loomis' theory regarding Myers' return, but expresses his own fear. If Loomis is correct, Haddonfield could become a killing field for Myers. After making plans with Annie to meet up over at the Wallace house to engage in some Halloween night festivities, Linda and her boyfriend Bob arrive and park just outside of the Wallace house. Already in the festive spirit and full of beer, Bob playfully carries Linda across the front lawn and up the stairs to the front door. Upon entering the Wallace house, the couple is startled to find the house completely dark and neither Annie nor Lindsay appears to be anywhere in sight. Linda speculates that Annie must have taken Lindsay out for something and considers looking for a note. Bob, however, convinces Linda otherwise, and the two fall on the living room couch and start making out. Little do they realize, Annie is already dead, and they are being observed by her killer, Michael Myers. As the night goes on, Laurie continues entertaining Tommy and Lindsay with jack-o'-lantern carving and watching old movies on television. Laurie peeks out of the window over at the Wallace house and sees Bob's parked van, smiles, and laments about everyone having a good time tonight. Laurie dismisses her lack of having teenage fun on Halloween night and gets back to babysitting. But no sooner than Laurie can sit down with the kids and relax to finish their movie, she gets a call from Linda, back over at the Wallace house. Much to Laurie's surprise, Linda asks Laurie if Annie is around. Laurie tells Linda that Annie should have been back by now and only went to pick up her boyfriend Paul. Expecting Annie to show up back at the Wallace house, asks Linda to have Annie call her later about what time to put Lindsay to bed. Now hearing that Lindsay is being babysat by Laurie and will not be returning home for the rest of the night, signals to Linda and her boyfriend they can have uninterrupted fun. As though she knows something doesn't feel quite right, Laurie takes one long look across the street at the Wallace house before turning away. Full of beer, under the covers, and lost in passion, Linda and Bob are too involved in the moment and having senses dulled by cans of alcohol to be aware of the danger that is uncomfortably present. After a bout of romance and lovemaking, Linda and Bob roll over, relax, and light up for a smoke. Linda, wanting a beer, playfully nudges Bob, encouraging him to run downstairs and get both of them a cold drink. Bob heads down to the Wallace family's kitchen. Bob grabs a couple of drinks from the fridge and looks for chips and snacks in the cupboard. While distracted by the need for food, Bob is startled by a creaking noise from the kitchen's back door. He calls out to Annie but gets no response. Guessing that his girlfriend Linda is pranking him, he swings open the closet door to his right, then calls for Linda by name, only to find the closet empty. Still expecting Linda, instead, Michael Myers forcefully surges out of the next door. With his arm extended and his hand gripping Bob's neck in a chokehold, Bob struggles for his life, but his efforts are hopeless against the otherworldly strength of Michael Myers. Bob is lifted off the ground by the grip around his neck. He struggles to the last second until Michael Myers raises his butcher knife and forces it through Bob and the wall behind him. Bob is left impaled against the wall as Michael Myers curiously stands and seemingly admires his second work of violence for the night. Anticipating the return of her boyfriend, Linda playfully reacts to the bedroom door being opened by a figure standing in the doorway, draped in a bed sheet and wearing her boyfriend's eyeglasses. Assuming the figure is her boyfriend, Linda asks about the beer she requested, but oddly, only silence follows her question. When the sheet-wearing figure still refuses to answer, Linda resorts to playful titillation to elicit the expected reaction from her boyfriend. Now irritated with the one-sided exchange, Linda angrily jumps out of bed to make a phone call to Laurie to see where her friends Annie and Paul are. Thoroughly annoyed with what she believes to be weird and killjoy behavior from her boyfriend, with her back turned away from the bedroom doorway, Linda is distracted long enough for Michael Myers to make his deliberate and menacing advance toward her. Laurie answers the phone expecting Annie to finally answer. Instead, The only thing Lori hears is the audible moans and death throes of Linda as she struggles against unrelenting strangulation. While Lori still believes she is speaking to Annie, her face grows concerned when she's unable to find clarification from the other end of the receiver. As Linda succumbs to death, a close-up and frightening face of the rubber-masked Michael Myers is revealed. As Lori's voice is heard through the phone that has fallen away from Linda's hand, Michael Myers picks up the phone, places the receiver to his ear, listens, and seems transfixed on Lori's voice. Concerned by the disturbing utterances heard through the phone, Lori moves to the window and looks across at the Wallace house. Once Lori observes the lights turn on, then off, she picks up the phone again and dials Annie's number, but no one answers. Deep in thought and still concerned with the odd occurrences, Lori walks upstairs to check on the children. Dr. Loomis, still focused on Michael Myers returning to his childhood home, grows weary of waiting for the return of the killer. Loomis nervously looks away in the direction of the Wallace house. It is in this direction where Loomis's Halloween night surveillance is validated when the station wagon stolen by Michael Myers is located, parked near another residence. Loomis bolts in the direction of the station wagon. Upon close inspection, he now knows Michael Myers is close by. With Tommy and Lindsay safely tucked in bed and asleep, Lori decides to grab her keys and leave the Doyle house to go and check on Annie and her friends. As Lori leaves the Doyle house, with each step she takes toward the darkened Wallace home, the tension of silence builds. With no communication from any of her friends, Lori can only assume that something very wrong has happened. Once she gets to the front door, Lori buzzes the alarm, knocks on the door, and calls out to her friends. Still, nothing but silence. Lori enters the Wallace house through the back kitchen door. She carefully pokes her head in and calls out to Annie, Linda, then Bob, but there is only dead silence. Thinking she is still being pranked and growing annoyed by it, she shouts out to her friends to stop with the joke. As a sense of worry begins to hit Lori, she has little choice but to venture upstairs. With the house in complete darkness and with mounting fear, Lori walks blindly up the stairs into a dark silence. Ever careful, as Lori turns the corner onto the second floor, at the end of the hallway, she sees one bedroom door slightly ajar with an orange glow emitting from the room and just bleeding from the cracks underneath the door. As Lori slowly enters the room, she is confronted by an unimaginable horror. It takes a moment for her to process. A ghoulish display is laid out before Lori. With a deathly pallor to her skin, Annie lies dead in position on the bed just in front of Judith Myers' headstone. With the glow of the Halloween jack-o'-lantern providing an eerie, amber-colored illumination to this scene of horror, reality breaks Lori as she begins to scream. Lori recoils in absolute shock, and while she is still reacting to the scene of Annie being dead, she backs into the corner of the room. Suddenly, she screams in terror as Bob's dead body comes swinging down right beside her. And before Lori can even completely process the events unfolding in front of her, a closet door swings open revealing Linda's dead, folded up body stuffed inside. In complete shock, Lori runs out into the hallway and turns, looking back at the bedroom. Screaming, crying, distraught, and still trying to grasp hold of reality, she backs into the safety of a dark corner in the hallway. As she sobs, Michael Myers emerges from the shadows just behind her. Michael Myers moves within striking distance and brings down his butcher knife across Lori's upper arm. Lori screams out in pain, loses her balance, and tumbles over the staircase railing. Like a monster on a mission, Michael Myers takes on an even more deliberate and aggressive stature as he begins to stalk Lori. Lori wills herself to stand and run for her life as the unrelenting evil pursues her. Lori's escape is blocked when she encounters the front door locked from the inside. Making a reversal back towards the kitchen and sensing Myers not far behind, Lori thinks to lock the door leading into the kitchen and makes a frantic dash to the exit leading to the backyard. In complete terror, Lori struggles to open the blocked exit in the kitchen. While Lori panics, Michael Myers' aggressive attack intensifies against the door, blocking him from reaching his victim. Before long, Michael Myers' fist smashes through the wood-paneled door and focuses directly on the struggling Lori. Michael bursts into the kitchen and is ready to attack, but in survival mode, Lori smashes her bare hand through the glass door and finally escapes. Stumbling across the front lawn, Lori screams at the top of her lungs for anyone to help her. With her injuries, Lori struggles to stay on her feet but keeps screaming for help. Lori stumbles onto the porch of a neighbor's house, and despite her pleas for help, the neighbors look through the window but ignores the screaming young woman. With no help in sight, Lori runs back across the street to the Doyle house. Unable to find her house key, Lori begins banging on the door and screaming Tommy's name. Like a mindless monster, Michael Myers continues his unfazed pursuit of Lori. In desperation, Lori tosses a planter, and it smashes against Tommy's window, awakening him. Tommy unlocks the door. Lori enters and commands him to run upstairs. When Lori attempts to call for help, she realizes the phone line has been disconnected, but more shockingly, she discovers the living room entry is open and that Michael Myers has entered the house. Lori cowers in fear and resignation. This evil is not ending. Out of the shadows, Michael Myers lunges with a knife attack against Lori. Myers misses, but Lori's survival instincts kick in with an attack against her stalker, stabbing him with a knitting needle. Traumatized, using the butcher knife as leverage, Lori rises off the floor. Carefully, she looks over the back of the couch at the lifeless figure of Michael Myers. Lori then sinks back on the couch, staring at the monster's weapon, and in repulsion, drops the knife to the floor. While still scouring the streets in search of Michael Myers, Dr. Loomis is met by Sheriff Brackett and explains that he has seen the stolen station wagon. After fending off the second attack by Michael Myers, Lori limps upstairs to prepare Tommy and Lindsay to leave the house for safety. Tommy asks Lori if that was the boogeyman. Ensuring the kids that she killed the threat and nothing to fear, the kids see the reawakened Michael Myers. The kids scream, and instinctively, all three run. Lori instructs the kids to lock themselves inside one of the bedrooms. Lori runs into the master bedroom and attempts to escape to the balcony, but quickly decides to lock herself into a louvered closet. Michael Myers closes in on Lori. Lori wraps material from a hanger around the door's inside handles to prevent it from opening. Lori then moves to the furthest corner of the closet for safety. Michael begins ferociously rattling the door, trying to enter. Lori whimpers as the monster's actions become increasingly frantic and violent. Like the relentless monster he is, Michael Myers smashes through the louvered door with his hand, and while blindly reaching in, he inadvertently switches on the light. Now lit, Lori sees her opportunity, grabs a wire coat hanger, untwists the wire, and jams it into the eye of Michael Myers. In pain, Michael drops his butcher knife to the floor of the closet. Lori grabs the knife and jabs it into Myers, sending him falling backwards. Lori carefully watches the seemingly lifeless body of Michael Myers as she exits the closet. Lori instructs the children to leave the house and run to a neighbor and ask them to call the police. Distraught and mentally exhausted, Lori sinks to the floor, but in the foreground, we see Michael Myers rising from the dead once again. The kids exit the Doyle house screaming. Dr. Loomis witnesses the children fleeing the home and realizes his worst nightmare is alive. As Lori lifts herself to stand, the continuing threat of Michael Myers looms. Myers lunges at Lori and violently begins to strangle her with his hands. Dr. Loomis runs up the stairs of the Doyle home. During Lori's struggle, she manages to pull the mask from Michael Myers, causing him to uncharacteristically pause just long enough for Dr. Loomis to pull out his revolver and fire at Myers. Despite being hit, Michael Myers places the mask back on his face. Loomis then turns into the bedroom and fires at Myers repeatedly until he stumbles backward and falls over the bedroom balcony. Finally, Michael Myers lies dead on the front lawn. Still taken by the impact of the moment, Loomis attempts to still fire his weapon even after the threat has ended. Still crying, Lori looks at Loomis and admits it was the boogeyman. Loomis acknowledges her statement. Dr. Loomis walks over, looks over the balcony, and sees that Michael Myers is gone. The haunting Halloween theme begins, which leaves the audience with a cold chill. Loomis is left with a stunned look on his face as he can hardly process exactly what has just transpired. Lori continues sobbing. The movie ends with a look at the locations throughout this Haddonfield neighborhood where Michael Myers has inflicted horror on that Halloween night.
That's all for this episode of FrightenHouse Movie Morgue Recaps. Please click like, comment, and subscribe to FrightenHouse.